They thought a mail-order bride would be easy to control. Someone soft, someone desperate. But what stepped off that stagecoach wore old war boots, carried a blade behind her smile, and had eyes that had seen too much to ever flinch again. Her name was Lenora Graves, once a frontier scout, twice betrayed, left behind by men who wanted a wife, but couldn't handle a warrior. The town whispered she was cursed, too cold, too hard, too dangerous. But one man saw through the smoke and scars. He didn't ask her to change. He didn't flinch from the fire in her. Instead, he walked straight into it, and together they'd carved justice into a land that had forgotten what the word even meant. They found her at first light, tied to a scorched fence post at the edge of the deserted prairie, blood caked along her temple and her boots missing. The wind tugged at her tattered dress like it wanted to carry her away, but she held on, barely. One eye swollen shut, lips cracked from sun and pain. She wasn't supposed to be alive, and yet there she was. Her name was Lenora Graves. She was a mail-order bride. At least that's what the paper said. Bride requested for a rancher in Copper Hollow, Wyoming. But the man who sent for her never met her stage, never claimed her. Some say he got cold feet. Others say he died. Lenora never got the chance to find out. 2 days after arriving, she vanished. Until now. Sheriff Anders stood over her body, one hand on his revolver, the other rubbing the back of his neck like the desert heat was some unsolvable equation. She looks wrong, he muttered to no one, like she fought back when she shouldn't have. She did more than fight, said a voice behind him. A shadow dismounted from a horse, a tall man with weathered boots, a coat too long for the season, and a wide-brimmed hat that hid half his face. His name was Jesse Morgan. No one called him sheriff. Not anymore. He hadn't spoken a word in nearly 10 years, but when he looked at Lenora's broken form, tied up like some warning nailed to the land, something old stirred in him, something long buried under guilt and gunsmoke. She alive? Jesse asked, voice gravel rough. Anders turned. Barely. Jesse walked past him without permission. His knife was out before the sheriff could speak, slicing through the coarse rope with surgical precision. Lenora slumped into his arms like she'd been waiting for this moment, her whole body trusting something her mind hadn't caught up to yet. She needs the doc. Anders nodded dumbly, still watching as Jesse lifted her like a bundle of fragile truth and turned toward town. No one tried to stop him. The doctor's office smelled like antiseptic and whiskey. Doc Miller leaned over Lenora with practiced hands, his daughter Cassie standing nearby with a fresh bowl of water and a gaze sharper than her father's scalpel. She's been whipped, the doc muttered. Split lip, fractured wrist, ribs, maybe 2 broken. Whoever did this wanted her to be seen, wanted to make a point. She's no ordinary bride, Cassie said. Look at her hands. Everyone leaned closer. Calloused palms, fingertips marked with old burns and blade nicks. Fighter, Jesse said quietly from the corner. Doc Miller glanced at him, surprised. You know her. Jesse shook his head, but something in his eyes said otherwise. Lenora came to that night, gasping like she'd clawed her way out of the dark. She tried to sit up, regretted it immediately. The pain came like thunder. Easy, Cassie whispered. You're safe now. Doc patched you up best he could. Lenora turned her head. Through the haze, she saw him, Jesse, sitting by the window, carving something from a piece of pine, not looking at her, not asking questions, just watching. You were the one, she croaked. At the fence. Jesse didn't reply, just nodded once. Lenora stared at him, eyes glassy but burning. They said I was too much, said I talked too loud, rode too well, shot straighter than their boys, called me a liar, a thief, a whore. Her voice cracked, but not from tears, from rage. I buried 3 brothers, she said, dug the graves myself. Then I signed that damn letter and came here thinking maybe I could be someone else. Jesse finally looked at her. You are, he said. Outside, a storm rolled in over Copper Hollow. Inside, a girl who had been thrown away found her first breath of truth. And the man who saved her remembered what it meant to fight. Not with guns, but with purpose. Lenora Graves didn't remember falling asleep. Pain still clung to her ribs like barbed wire, and each breath scraped against the bruises painted across her skin. But something was different. It wasn't the bitter cold of dirt or the stiff bite of rope. It was the faint scent of smoke, wood smoke, and something warm under her cheek. When her eyes opened, she saw rough-hewn beams overhead. A stone hearth glowed dim in the corner, casting flickers of firelight across a small cabin. She tried to sit up, but the protest in her ribs stopped her fast. The movement drew the attention of the figure seated across the room. Broad shoulders, a coat worn thin at the seams, and a face mostly shadowed by a low-brimmed hat. The man didn't speak. He simply nodded once and stood, moving toward the fire where a black kettle hung. The room was quiet save for the soft bubbling of whatever he was heating. She watched as he ladled out a bit of broth into a tin cup and brought it to her. "Where?" Her voice cracked, raw and weak. He crouched beside her bedroll and offered the cup. He didn't answer, just studied her for a beat, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled something out. A small, half-finished carving. A horse. Rough but beautiful. The details told of long practice. His fingers worked it absent-mindedly, his eyes returning to the fire. "You're the one who cut me loose," she whispered. He nodded once. "You got a name?" The knife kept moving. No answer. Lenora took the cup with trembling hands and sipped. Salt, meat, and something green. It tasted like survival. "They said you were dead," she murmured. That paused the carving. He looked up at her then, and in his eyes she saw something that caught her breath. Grief that had turned to iron. Pain that had long since stopped bleeding and simply hardened. "I was," he said at last. His voice was hoarse, unused. "Before I found you." Lenora didn't know what to say to that. She lay back against the rolled blanket and tried to make sense of anything. The last she remembered was the ambush, the outlaw who spat at her feet, the others who laughed and shoved her face first into the dirt. And then, silence, a knife in the dark, the flash of a rifle barrel, a shadow that moved like judgment. "Why help me?" she asked finally. The man didn't answer right away. He stood, walked to a crate near the hearth, and pulled out something wrapped in oiled cloth. A badge, tarnished and bent. He set it on the table where the firelight caught the faint outline of a star. "Because I've seen what happens when men like that go unchecked," he said, his voice like dry leaves. "And I've seen what it costs when no one stands between them and the people they break." Lenora's fingers tightened on the blanket. "I've seen worse," she muttered. "I've been worse." His eyes flicked toward her. "So have I." They sat in silence a long while. She sipped the broth, and he carved. The fire cracked gently between them, filling in the things they didn't say. "What do they call you?" she asked, half daring. He didn't answer. She leaned her head back and sighed. "Well, if you're going to keep saving my life, I'll need something to call you. Even hey you gets tiresome." A twitch at the corner of his mouth, the closest thing to a smile. "Name's Jesse," he said finally. She nodded. "Lenora." The rain started sometime in the night, tapping gently against the roof. Somewhere far off, thunder rumbled like the last breath of something dying. And in a cabin miles from the world that had tried to bury her, two broken souls sat across the fire. The silence between them no longer sharp but soft, like the first whisper of something beginning. By the second morning, Lenora could walk, barely. Jesse had wrapped her ribs tight with a practiced hand and left her a walking stick carved from a twisted branch. It was almost too smooth, too thoughtful, for a man who barely spoke. She used it now to limp outside the cabin, blinking against the high country sunlight. The air smelled like pine and old snow. His cabin stood alone on a ridge, overlooking miles of empty Wyoming land, vast, brutal, and breathtaking. Jesse stood a few yards off, feeding logs into a half-dug fire pit. She watched him for a while before asking, "You live out here alone?" He didn't turn. "Safer. For you or them?" He didn't answer. Just placed the last log and stood, brushing off his hands. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, and as the wind tugged at the edge of his coat, she caught a flash of silver beneath the collarbone. An old scar, long and deep. "You were Law," she said quietly. He didn't move, didn't deny it. "I recognize the way you carry the weight. That badge in your coat." I've seen men bury theirs. Yours looks like you keep it to remind you." Jesse finally turned, and something in his eyes made her breath catch. "I keep it to remember why I stopped." Lenora followed him back inside, each step a reminder of the bruises still healing. On the table sat a leather satchel she hadn't noticed before, worn but stitched with care. She hesitated. "You mind?" He nodded once and she opened it. Inside were a few folded papers, maps, an old army journal, and near the bottom, a letter in faded ink. She pulled it out carefully, her heart stilled as she read. "To whoever finds this, if anyone does, I was a daughter once, a sister, and I tried to be strong when Pa told me to marry the foreman. Said it was safer that way. But safety and cages aren't the same. If you're reading this, and I didn't make it, bury me somewhere with Sky. Somewhere free. And tell Jesse Morgan he was right. About everything." The signature at the bottom was shaky. "Ellie." Lenora looked up sharply. Jesse stood in the doorway, watching her with a stillness that was more than silence. It was memory. "Wait. She was my sister," he said. "She ran. Tried to be her own woman. Ended up traded off like cattle. When I found her, it was too late." Lenora swallowed the lump rising in her throat. "I fought. Killed for her. Killed for others. They said I lost my mind. Maybe I did. But when the badge turned against what it was meant to protect, I turned on it too." He walked to the table, picked up the letter and folded it carefully. "You remind me of her. The fight in your eyes. The pain you wear like armor." Lenora held his gaze. "And you remind me of the kind of man no one believes in anymore." He blinked at that, once, then looked away. Outside, thunder growled across the sky, a storm brewing from the east. But it was the sound of hooves that froze them both, the sharp rhythm of more than one rider heading up the ridge. Jesse moved to the window, eyes narrowing. "Company." Lenora reached for the old rifle leaning against the wall. "Friends of yours?" He checked the cylinder of his revolver with a flick. If they were, they forgot how to knock. Together they stepped onto the porch, the wind rising around them, carrying dust, tension, and the promise of blood. Lenora cocked the rifle. Jesse stood still as stone. The first rider crested the hill. It was time for ghosts to be reckoned with. The first rider wore the kind of hat that told a story, a sheriff's brim curled high and sun-bleached with time. But it was the badge glinting on his chest that caught Jesse's eye. Not the tin star of justice, not anymore. It was the crest of Ash Ridge, stamped with the sigil of the McCallum Mining Company. Bought law. The other two riders flanked him like shadows. One carried a double barrel so casually it made Lenora's stomach twist. The other had a scar that ran from ear to chin and an expression that said mercy wasn't his trade. "Name's Sheriff Grayson," the lead rider called out, reining his horse just short of the porch. "We're looking for a woman. Mail-order bride gone missing out of Black Hollow. Heard she was headed this way. You seen her?" Lenora stepped forward before Jesse could say a word. Her voice was steady. "I'm right here." All three riders tensed. One reached for his gun. Jesse moved faster, had the hammer cocked before the man's fingers grazed leather. "Don't," Jesse growled. Grayson held up a hand, but his smirk said he wasn't done. "You got spirit, miss. Can't blame the foreman for wanting you back. Says you owe him a contract." "I didn't sign my life away," Lenora snapped. "I signed a name, that's all." Scarface chuckled. "A name's enough where we come from, and we've come to take it back." Jesse's stance didn't change. "This ridge is free land. She's not going anywhere." The sheriff's eyes flicked to Jesse's holster. "You used to wear a badge, didn't you? Morgan, was it? Heard you lost your mind after Broken Pass." Jesse's jaw twitched. "Number I lost my faith." "Well," Grayson said, backing his horse a step, "we'll let the boss know where you're holed up. He'll come with more papers. And more men." "We'll be ready," Lenora said. The riders turned without another word, their horses kicking up dirt as they vanished down the trail. Jesse didn't relax until the hoofbeats faded completely. Inside, Lenora slumped against the doorframe, heart still pounding. "You shouldn't have stepped forward like that," Jesse said. "You'd rather I hide?" He shook his head. "I'd rather they didn't know who you were. Now they'll come harder. With warrants. With fire, Lenora looked him dead in the eye. Let them. I'm done hiding. I've run from men like that my whole life. I'd rather die standing than live kneeling. Something in him shifted then. Not a smile exactly, but something warmer than the ice he usually wore. They'll burn this place, he said quietly. Then we build something better from the ash. Jesse nodded once. Then we start preparing. For the next 3 days, they dug trenches, reinforced the cabin, stockpiled wood and water. Lenora practiced with the rifle until her shoulder ached and her bruised ribs screamed. One night, as the fire crackled low and thunder rumbled in the distance, Jesse handed her a small cloth bundle. She opened it slowly. Inside, a carved wooden horse, rough, strong, and in the saddle, a tiny figure holding a rifle. Her. She looked up, stunned. I used to make 'em for my sister, Jesse said. Figured it was time you had one too. Lenora held it gently, as if it might break. Why? He didn't answer, just stared into the fire. Outside, lightning split the sky, and on the wind came the distant sound of riders, dozens of them. The mountain was about to burn, and they were ready. They came just after dusk. 12 riders first, then more filtering through the trees like ghosts. The McCallum Mining Company had sent its answer to defiance. A small army dressed in dusters and paid silence. Some bore fake badges, others carried torches. Lenora stood at the cabin window, her rifle already loaded, her breath steady. Jesse was beside her, twin revolvers on his hips, his long coat ghosting with movement every time the wind shifted. They think this is still about property, she muttered. Jesse's voice was iron. They're about to learn it's about people. The first torch arced through the sky. It hit the woodshed behind the cabin and burst into flame, sending sparks spiraling upward. Another landed near the corral. The horses spooked, whinnying in terror. Hold, Jesse whispered, his hand resting on her shoulder. Not yet. The riders circled, emboldened by fire and numbers. Their leader, Grayson, trotted forward under the false banner of negotiation. Last chance, he called out. Send her out, or we torch the whole damn ridge. Lenora stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. Come take me. Grayson smirked. Was hoping you'd say that. Behind him, rifles were raised, but Jesse was faster. One shot cracked through the air, and Grayson's hat flew from his head, bullet grazing just inches above his scalp. Next one's not a warning, Jesse growled, stepping into the firelight. You think a badge makes you law? Real law protects the people. Grayson spat into the dirt. You're just an old ghost with a fast draw. Jesse's eyes burned. And you're standing on his grave. They fired first. The ridge exploded into chaos. Gunfire lit the trees. Flames licked at the barn, and smoke curled through the trees like fingers searching for weakness. But Lenora didn't falter. Every shot she fired had a name. Every breath was one she'd earned through blood and defiance. Bobby Turner and 2 ranch hands from town had joined them that morning, hidden in the high brush with hunting rifles. Now they opened fire, picking off the riders trying to flank. The battle raged long into the night. By the time the torches were doused and the final rider fled into the dark, 4 men lay dead on the ridge, none of them Jesse's. Lenora knelt by the porch, breathing hard, smoke in her hair and tears mixing with sweat. Jesse crouched beside her. You good? She nodded slowly. You. He looked down at a gash on his side. Clipped, nothing deep. They sat in silence for a long moment, listening to the wind. More will come, she said at last. I know. She looked over at the burning barn, then back at him. You ever think about leaving? Used to, Jesse admitted, but not anymore. Why? He looked at her, eyes softening. Because there's something here worth staying for. She didn't speak, just reached into her coat and pulled out the wooden horse. Its tiny rider stared forward, unchanged, but the hands that held it had. Morning came on the heels of smoke and silence. The barn was gone, blackened ribs of timber still steaming in the light. The cabin stood, scarred but unbroken. Lenora sat on the porch steps, her bandaged hand wrapped around a tin cup of coffee. Jesse stood nearby, watching the trail disappear into the pines. He hadn't said a word since just before dawn. He didn't need to, because in the distance, they could hear them. Riders. Not a gang this time. Not the faceless mercenaries of McCallum's pocket. This was something slower, sharper. Worn boots, lawful silence. U.S. Marshals. 3 of them, riding under a clean banner, bearing the seal of the governor. They dismounted with quiet precision, eyes scanning the scene. One knelt beside the burnt wreckage. Another studied the bullet casings scattered around the porch. The third, an older marshal with a white beard and steady gaze, approached them. "You Jesse Morgan?" he asked. Jesse didn't answer, just nodded once. "And you're the woman who was rejected in Bitter Creek for being too much trouble?" Lenora stood. "Guess that makes 2 of us." The marshal's face didn't change, but his eyes warmed. "We've been tracking McCallum's trail of corruption for months. What you did here, it forced our hand. Testimony from survivors, burned ledgers recovered from that barn, governors sending reinforcements." She raised an eyebrow. "So the law's finally catching up?" "Sometimes justice takes the long road," the marshal admitted, then reached into his coat and pulled out a star. A U.S. Marshal's badge, not polished, not new, one that had seen storms and blood. He held it out to Jesse. "You earned this years ago. You just never wore it again." Jesse stared at the badge, unmoving. "I stopped being a marshal when the people I swore to protect got buried with that badge." The marshal looked to Lenora, then back to him. "Then maybe it's time someone wore it for the right reasons." Jesse didn't move, but Lenora stepped forward, her voice calm, sure. "Then give it to me." The old lawman blinked. "Ma'am?" "She fought harder than any man I've seen," Jesse said softly behind her. "She didn't back down when they came for her, or for me." The marshal studied her for a long moment, then slowly handed it over. She pinned it to her coat. No ceremony, no pride, just truth. The other marshals tipped their hats. "We'll send word back to Cheyenne. This valley's yours now." When the horses vanished back down the trail, silence fell again. Lenora turned to Jesse. "You okay with that?" "I always was," he said. "Just didn't know it until now." She smiled faintly and pulled something from her pocket, a tiny soot-streaked carving of a horse. She placed it on the porch rail, beside Jesse's old revolver. "What's that?" he asked. She looked up at him, eyes steady. "The past," she said, "and we're done carrying it." Below the ridge, the valley stretched wide and green, touched by smoke but alive. A new wind blew through the trees, and for the first time in years, Jesse Morgan breathed deep. They stood side by side, not as fugitives, not as survivors, but as the law. Not just the law of a badge, but the law of those who'd fought for something better and chosen to stay. Lenora touched the star pinned to her chest. "You ready?" Jesse asked. She nodded once. "Then let's ride." And they did. 2 silhouettes against the rising sun, down a trail that finally belonged to them. A trail no longer haunted by the past, but lit by the promise of everything still to come. And so, across these unforgiving lands, another tale drifts away with the wind. If this quiet courage, this stubborn heart touched you in any way, leave a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and pass this story on to someone who needs it. Don't forget to subscribe, because out here there are still so many truths left to tell, each one carved from pain, hope, and dust. This is Wild West Stories. Thank you for watching.